Hello, good morning, and welcome to today's Development Finance Today Roundtable. We are going to be discussing everything about the future of what sustainable development might look like. This is incredibly topical. I'm really excited to dive into this conversation with our panel. My name is Caron Schreuder. I'm your host, Managing Director of Medianett Publishing. And we're supported today by West One Loans. Thank you so much to Guy and Alan, who we've got on the roundtable today, for supporting this series. We also have Ben Spencer, a director at GS8, which is a developer that is working really hard on innovative ways to deliver what he calls planet positive homes, which is good news for all of us. DFT as a publication has been providing a platform for sustainable property creation news for quite a few years, but the events of the global pandemic definitely brought everything into much sharper focus. We were forced to look at our environment in a much different way. 2022 has certainly seen a shift in the mindsets of our readers, who represent a cross-section of developers, brokers, and lenders. Everybody wants to hear more about ESG. It's the topic du jour, and businesses have a responsibility now to factor in policies that are less nice to have and more a requirement to trade competitively. Among all of this, however, there is a very real need to produce more housing, but it does need to meet our ambitions of net zero emissions in UK real estate. Furthermore, we're plagued by a period of what is still defined by recovery as a result of the pandemic, and is also marked with soaring inflation and those rising interest rates. This is all to say, while very gloomy, that we know what the direction of travel is, but the road is far from smooth. Policy recommendations and regulation have come in thick and fast since 2007, aimed at energy and efficiency improvements and lowering emissions derived from the sector. However, it has been criticised as not being far-reaching enough and unsupported by the tax system. I'm sure this is something that we'll get into later today in the conversation. There are some upsides to this, or some positive lights, including some industry initiatives that are picking up the mantle where it comes to setting out informal benchmarks and filling the gaps in framework that aren't yet sort of filled by policy. I also would like to highlight that projects and initiatives led by companies like GS8 and Ben are definitely showing us the way forward, and it is incredibly positive to be hearing from him today. He will be telling us a lot more about his journey to creating the UK's first carbon positive and zero waste projects. As we operate quite heavily in an unregulated space, there is a reliance on all parties to do the right thing. But is the pro-climate message reaching everyone? Or, to borrow an analogy that I heard this morning, is it a bit like electric cars? Demand is increasing, but ultimately, can it be seen as prohibitive in terms of cost and convenience, and therefore difficult to mass market? How can we break free from that sort of analogy when it comes to building greener? We're seeing a lot of lenders expanding their green offerings. And a question I have for the panel is, how much demand is there really? And are brokers plugged into this? How much of an obstacle is access to funding? And could healthy pressure by brokers be applied to embrace and encourage further progress from lenders to back eco-conscious house building? So for now, I'm going to hand over to our panel and for them to tell you a little bit more about themselves. I will start with Guy, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. My name's Drew. I work at West One Loans, which is a specialist lending business, and I run the development finance business, where we finance residential developments, usually between about 1 to 20 million.
Thank you. Alan.
I'm Alan Coleman. I work with Guy as one of the portfolio managers in the development finance team at West One as well.
Thanks, Alan. Good to have you with us. And Ben, over to you.
Hi, so my name is Ben Spencer. I'm Managing Director and co-founder of GS8. We're a construction and development company based in London.
Fantastic, thank you. Just a reminder to those that are tuned in live, we do have a Q&A function where you can ask questions throughout the session, and we will try to get to as many of those as possible. Okay, so I'd like to kick off the conversation with a contribution from Guy and Alan around the lending landscape when it comes to supporting green developments. What are you seeing as a funder or as a funding partner to these developers right now? What does demand look like? What is your overall impression of what is expected from you as a lender at the minute?
Yeah, so I'll start on that one. So I think we're hearing more and more about it, and we're working hard behind the scenes, I guess, to put together initiatives where we think we can actually help and encourage developers to be more green and sustainable and focus on that. I think going through funding a site like this of Ben's and has been really great because it's a good learning experience for us, and it's we I guess see Ben as a bit of a trailblazer in this, and I think he can sort of set the scene for a lot of developers thinking about how you actually go about this. From our perspective, we want to be supporting sustainable developments. It's a big thing we think about most days. We've obviously seen lenders in the market go into it, which is great to see. And there's various ways that we can help incentivize developers to build greener. But I think from my perspective, in terms of the demand currently out there, I think as a whole, it's minimal. So if I think about the new deals that we see come across our desk, it's probably a small percentage in terms of people focusing on green initiatives. But I think, as you sort of said, the analogy towards the electric cars, we saw a few on the roads, and now it's just exploded, and that's what people expect. So I think it's in its infancy, but I guess all the institutions, the financial institutions behind it, whether it be us as specialist lenders or the funds that we borrow our money from, everyone's thinking about it, and everyone's working in behind the scenes to do stuff about it to make sure that we can be as supportive as possible for customers like Ben.
Thanks very much, Guy. That's a good overview. Alan, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Just aside from echoing what Guy said, I wouldn't really say there's much else apart from as lenders, we just have to make sure that we are making not just brokers but also developers aware that there is access to funding for these innovative products and projects going forward. So rather than being a barrier to them, we'll actually try and help them to do it, as Guy was saying.
When devising a product to support something like this, where do you take your knowledge from? Do you take that from brokers and developers? How are you gathering the intel that will ultimately make up a product that is very specifically targeted at supporting eco development?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it depends how far you want to go with it. You know, there's one measure being EPC ratings and basing a product off that. A lot of people have done that, and the longer term sort of mortgage market has based it on that because it's an easy measure. But I guess that only goes so far in terms of EPC ratings. There's a lot more to it, and Ben will probably talk us through that a bit later. So I think from our perspective, we'll gather as much information as we can out of the developments that we fund. But again, I think it's all a learning experience for us, and funding these types of sites is probably a way where we can learn quicker because we're actually more involved with it and seeing it firsthand. So yeah, I think, look, it's information. You have to do quite a lot of research, but I think going through and funding these sorts of developments is probably the best way to really understand it, and to actually understand how you measure all these factors, and then how best it's to create the finance product to help incentivize this stuff. And I guess you've also got to factor in what it costs for developers to put together this stuff. So it does the benefit in terms of what we can provide on a financing side outweigh the costs that developers have to put in to procure the sorts of developments as you'll hear with Ben.
Thank you. So Ben, we'll come over to you to hear a bit about the origins of GS8, what your initial ambitions were and where you got to, really.
Sure. So I think as a business, when we first started, our underlying goal has always been to deliver homes to people that want to live in them rather than investors. So principally our demographics been first-time buyers and young families. And what we found after a couple of years is there was a pattern that once, particularly first-time buyers had scraped together money for a deposit, and potentially, furnishing or other things that come with buying a house for a first time, there was very little disposable income available in the first year or two as a result of that. So I'd say about 5.5 years ago, we decided we wanted to try and deliver homes that had little to no utility bills to be able to put a bit of money back in our residents' pockets. And actually, once we started to kind of venture into exploring how we would do that, started to understand actually that there was a very strong intrinsic link between energy, waste, and carbon. And at the time, we knew very little about the carbon emissions that the industry were producing, and how much of a large percentage that contributed to the total emissions for the UK and globally, and particularly also how much waste stream came out of development sites, even though it was staring us in the face as a construction company. You're blinded to it because when I guess was training or learning, on construction sites, it was just normal to throw something in a skip and it goes away and you don't think anything else of it. And so, at the same time, we did have an understanding that, trying to achieve BREEAM or, Code for Sustainable Homes at the time and other kind of industry benchmarks or accreditations were quite expensive and time consuming and very much tick boxes. And so we decided to kind of, bring a team together, clean the whiteboard or go with a clean slate and try and create a viable, and I'll come on to the viability part later, regenerative or sustainable building framework that could be flexible and rolled out across all of our sites. And so we set ourselves 3 main targets. On the construction side, it was to be carbon negative. We were calling it carbon positive, as you mentioned in the intro, but terminology has moved on since we started 5 years ago, and it's now deemed as carbon negative, which we define as the over a full life cycle. From the embodied carbon perspective, we define it as storing or sequestering more carbon in the buildings than the remaining embodied carbon emissions for man-made materials, concrete or metal work and things like that maybe can't be avoided for engineering reasons, at least in the short term. And so we currently have on our Orphan Road project that West One are funding a 1 to 1.4 ratio, 1 being embodied carbon from man-made materials, 1.4 being the kind of sequestered carbon in the natural materials, timber frame, and other natural products, which I can come on to later. The zero waste component is as it says on the tin, really. So our construction sites are now completely zero waste. So we don't use any skips. Nothing goes to landfill. Everything gets 100% reused and closed loop into the finished buildings, with exception to contaminated materials, which obviously we're unable to reuse. And again, I can elaborate on how we've reused some of those waste stream or products that would typically be disposed of later. And then the final piece is in operation to be net energy positive, which also has an impact on the operational carbon or net zero performance. And so the way that we do that is we took a very much fabric first approach. We look to reduce our facades down to the minimum number of materials possible, and really focused on quality of execution, particularly on air tightness and air permeability. And what that did is that took away the need to really go heavy on the buildings with renewables, which is where a lot of people spend money and where that kind of viability point comes into question. So we we're experiencing now, and also, you know, the modelling is showing that, you know, the houses will be passively heated and cooled throughout the year. You know, the heating demand is very low. You know, the energy demand is very low, and so, you know, all of those three things combined have driven the framework, or the creation of the framework, and all of everything that falls within that. So, I mean, do you want me to elaborate a bit more on these, or is there any questions initially on that?
I have a couple of follow-up questions. In terms of the framework that you've created, do you consider this proprietary to GS8, or would you like to see it rolled out on a wider scale? I'm hesitant to use the word franchised out, but could it be used by other developers and builders?
Yeah, definitely. The thing, you know, at the end of the day, we are a construction company, and so we've tried to simplify this process as much as possible, and that's one of the reasons why we didn't want to align ourselves with any accreditations. You know, for example, the buildings perform to Passive House standard. Actually, they're twice the benchmark of Passive House, but we, you know, we're not interested in Passive House accreditation because of everything that comes with it, and certainly, so our intention is to conclude the Orphan Road project, which we expect by the end of July to be off-site, to do maybe to roll it out on maybe one other of our projects, and then effectively outsource the blueprint to the market, you know, and kind of learn back from others, I guess, trying it out. We're working on 2 other frameworks at the moment, which are slightly more ambitious, and also an evolution of the first one. Particularly as we scale up, you know, or scale this onto our larger sites, you know, 50, 100 units plus. You know, there is going to be some evolution that's required, because some of what we've done is quite bespoke to this project. But nevertheless, there's a clear roadmap to be able to achieve that. So yeah, I think very much so. You know, this is a blueprint. It's actually very simple. When you break it down, what we've tried to do is simplify each element in order to bring costs down and to maintain viability, because, you know, I guess the overarching goal of this is, if, you know, we're a business at the end of the day, and we're a business that needs to make profit. You know, what we're doing is not for exhibitional purposes. It is really to you know, the future of our business, and what we believe the future of the housing industry and I guess the built environment. So yeah, it has to be flexible, and it has to be scalable across, you know, all companies and all projects.
That's, yeah, it's very interesting. When you were during this journey, was the company founded, and when did it all start? Which year?
So we founded the company in late 2014. Oh, it's gone so quick, and we started this about just over 5 years ago, creating this framework.
What would you say would be the top sort of 2 or 3 obstacles that you faced along the way? That, I mean, was there ever a time where you just thought, this is too much, the odds are sort of stacked against us?
There's been challenges. I think one of the challenges is definitions. You know, like, how do you define net zero, carbon negative, you know, energy positive, so on and so forth. So actually, it took us, I would say, 3 to 4 months just to establish like what our definitions were going to be before we could even start, you know, putting pen to paper on everything else. I think industry knowledge, you know, it took 8 to 9 months of workshops between led by us and our sustainability consultant, and to be honest, we were learning as much as everyone else in that process of actually, before we started designing, the principles and things that had to be, I guess, adhered to and considered, and the process that had to be taken. And I think availability of, you know, products in the market, both you know, both from an energy perspective and from a, you know, natural material perspective, that also have, you know, performance I guess criteria or values that are approved by, you know, building regs in the UK, and fire regs and insurance and you know, all of the various other tests that you know have to be adhered to.
Just on that point then, have you just thinking about it, like the procurement of this must be super difficult and quite niche, obviously. Have you seen like suppliers, you've obviously had to work with suppliers to get some of this stuff together. Have you seen them change what they're looking at and come up with new products to help, I guess, more energy efficient homes?
So I think what we found in the end is, so we actually procured the buildings before we designed them in terms of materials, and that was one of the ways that we managed to drive the waste down. So, you know, rather than saying to our architect, go and design me a building and then we'll procure the building, you know, based on the design, or procure the materials based on the design, we actually pre-procured the materials in terms of, you know, sizes and products, because we were using standard, you know, sizes. We knew they would be readily available, and that kind of drove, you know, what we ended up designing in terms of the buildings. So that we were able to simplify that process and deal with that a bit easier. I think in terms of, you know, the niche products, yeah, it's difficult. There's more and more product coming to market that's doing, you know, that's doing the same as traditional building materials now. So I think, you know, doing this from here on in is going to be a lot easier than when we started this 4 or 5 years ago. But yeah, for sure, it's it was a challenge at the start.
Yeah.
That makes sense. I suppose carrying on the procurement side of things, you mentioned you're moving on to your next project as well. How do you think the current climate, give it geopolitical and just economic full stop, how difficult will it be to procure those materials going forward, do you think?
I mean, look, we predominantly work with timber, you know, and wood-based materials, and there's a massive shortage of those across the industry, not just in the UK. So I think everyone needs to take that into consideration. So yeah, it's a really hard question to answer. I think we just need to take it, you know, month by month at the moment. But yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. You know, I think there's enough materials out there, and also there's enough waste stream out there. You know, you know, for example, we reused all of the blocks from our existing industrial buildings for the inner beam and block foundation. We used all of the reclaimed bricks as the facade for one of the buildings, and as like a core board foundation for one of the blocks. You know, we've used recycled steel purlins and steel beams for some of the roof structure. So, you know, I think that there are solutions. That doesn't work at scale because, you know, when you're delivering 500,000 plus units a year, it's hard to be that adaptable or that nimble. So I think, you know, I guess the supply chain will find its feet over the next 6 to 12 months, I hope, and there should be a more ready supply. But it is very hard to predict at the moment. I think we've got a bit of pain to go through yet before we reach that stability point.
And Ben, is the labour required on projects like this? Would you consider it specialist or specialised, and is it readily available to you? I mean, across the sector, we do have a little bit of a shortage in general, but now we're talking about non-standard builds. How does that impact you?
So I think, firstly, our frames and the actual building itself, apart from the fact that it's fully deconstructible at end of life, it's just a traditional timber frame. So we are in-house, we're a specialist timber frame contractor. So I know there's very few others available in the market. And so, you know, I think, yes, that is specialist to a certain extent, but, you know, a lot of the house builders are, you know, have that expertise, I guess, in-house. Some of them have, you know, timber frame factories. So I think, you know, it's starting to become more widely, or the expertise is you know, more widely available. In terms of working with the waste, yeah, that is particularly specialist, but there's some great small companies out there, you know, that are specialists, and architects particularly are specialists in circular economy practices and design. And so I think they're going to come to the forefront over the next couple of years, particularly. But I think it's just an evolution. You know, you look at the way that the building industry has progressed over the past, you know, 100, 200, 300 years. there's points when new technology and new machinery and new ways of construction get introduced, but actually really the main part of this is just a shift from RC frame or steel frame to potentially working with more timber, or working with materials that have more natural properties or of natural origin, and thinking about the longer term life cycle of those materials. So how do they get reused at end of life, and that kind of mechanical fixing of things rather than potentially welding or adhesive and things like that.
Yeah. Alan, just coming over to you, when a scheme like this, the Orphan Road one that you guys have supported, when that arrives at your desk, what are the first things that you would look at in terms of maybe obstacles to overcome or challenges that are specific to a deal like this or a project like this? And secondly, which is a question that's come through here about how it impacts your approach to valuations.
Okay, so in terms of your sort of first question there, so we look to approach every deal on its own merit and assess it on its own merit anyway. But obviously there will be some more specialist considerations to be taken here. But ultimately, it's just coming down to what will it cost to procure this? Do we think that the developer has the experience to procure this? And therefore, would we be in a position to help them fund it? So if we can answer those sort of three fundamental questions, then we'd look to progress the deal forward. And then what was your second question again, sorry?
How a deal of this nature might affect valuations. I'm sure it's very similar to your first answer, but are there any specifics from that team that you would expect them to flag, perhaps?
Not necessarily any massive things for them to consider. Obviously, as Ben says, you have to still consider that there are businesses involved, and you have to think about the sustainability. So providing that there's enough profit to be made there, and that there won't be many huge obstacles that would potentially affect the demand for these houses once they're complete, then I wouldn't see why there would be many issues with the valuations. We also have an internal valuations team separate to having these valued externally, so they'll give their insight as well, which is always useful.
Ben, do you see this sort of housing being available to various parts of the first-time buyer market? As in, are you aiming for sort of mid-market type buyers, where does affordability factor into all of this? Because we are in a little bit of a pressurized time from a general economic point of view. How big is that part of the market that you're aiming for, if indeed it is mid to high?
Yeah, so traditionally for us, we've targeted the, I would say, 300 to 600,000 pound capital value market. Sub kind of 650, 700 pound a foot, absolutely max. Our Walthamstow project that we're talking about now, we acquired it 6.5 years ago when values were much lower, and we've kind of out of our comfort zone as to where those values have grown to, which I think both we and West One were very surprised by. But yeah, I mean that's the target. We designed this framework, this development to work at that kind of level, and going forward that's the market that we'll be targeting. So I definitely think it's possible.
And Ben, just to give, I think, a bit of colour, like when I walked through the show home, do you want to just talk through a bit of like the materials and stuff that you've used? Like highlights were the sort of brick walls and the lampshades and the worktops and stuff. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, sure. So I think one of the things that we tried to do with this development and also with the framework is to find materials that have dual performance. So one of the ways that we managed to bring the waste down to zero on the project was to reuse 100% of all the soil that was excavated from the the foundations. So effectively what we did is we pressed it with a straw, like just straw that you would find in anywhere, as the binder, and let them dry for a couple of months, and actually reinstalled them as compressed earth blocks and compressed earth bricks in the party walls. So it provided both the kind of thermal and acoustic insulation for the party wall, but also an aesthetic finish, which looks great. It's been one of the main thing that any of the buyers coming in have it's drawn their eye to. We've also used, for example, like lime plasters in the bathroom, because it's a great material that absorbs moisture, humidity, and so works really well in the bathrooms. We collect up all of our wood chippings and shavings, and we send them off to a company in Birmingham called Foresso. They press them into a resin that gets sent back to us as a worktop that's then heat resistant and water resistant, and gives you like a terrazzo type finish, which looks great. So there's all these opportunities in waste that we never actually, even at the start of this process, realized were available. And the ability to convert waste into products that look great, that is actually very scalable, particularly in the example of the earth bricks, and actually very cost effective to install, because just using the earth bricks as an example, whereas we would typically need multiple materials for that build up in order to achieve the same thing, we've just got one material that gets installed that's incredibly dense and incredibly kind of thermally insulating, with great thermal mass, and it does the job of 3 materials and prevents the need, for example, for a paint or any other finish to that wall.
Where's the best place for people who are sort of listening to this to go and have a look at all the, I guess, the pictures and learn a bit more? Because like when you walk through this development, it is pretty cool. Like it's something like a house that you sort of walk into and you've never kind of experienced it before, with all the different types of materials.
I mean, we have a website for the project which is known as the Arbor, ARBOUR, which if you type in the Arbor Walthamstow should come up online, and you can see everything there. It's like an online brochure.
I'll be checking that out. Are there any left?
We've only launched 2 weeks ago. Only 3 properties to the market. So yeah, we've got a couple under offer already, which is good. But
okay.
there's some.
Checking that out. Guy, when you look at a project of this ilk, and you're funding it, do you allow for an extended sales marketing period, given its non-standard qualities? Is that mirrored by demand in a certain way? Do people need to consider for longer? Do they fly off the shelves in the same way?
I think funding perspective, we've got to be a bit more confident in terms of funding this stuff. So if we were pulling back leverage and making longer sales terms, then it just means less money in day one from a financing perspective, which would make it harder to finance for developers. So I think we've got to take a confidence look and say, look, we're going to back the developer here. So no, we don't extend timeframes or anything. I think you've got to get a bit excited about these sorts of schemes when you're funding them. Obviously, it is new sorts of products coming to the market. So I mean, it'll be really interesting over the next few months to keep an eye on how the sales are progressing. But from what we've seen early on, I mean, the prices in terms of price per square foot and everything that Ben's been able to achieve has been really, really positive. So yeah, I think you got to, funding this sort of stuff, you got to be pretty confident and not try and shy away from, I guess, where it could be perceived where there's a bit more risk. You've got to sort of back them for doing it, just to make it easily accessible from a financing perspective.
Do you think do you think it's important for us to be talking more about successful partnerships like this, to showcase a kind of a concept of, if you build it, they will come type of thing? and kind of encourage more people to seek out specialist funding to make these projects a reality. Because I would imagine that, Ben, perhaps you have peers who are doing something similar, that a lot of these things are sitting in design pipe dream phase only, just perhaps through a lack of knowledge about what's available out there to make them a reality.
Yeah, I think talking about this sort of stuff, having been on, you know, we'll definitely, there's probably developers listening to this at the moment thinking, oh, that sounds pretty cool. I've been thinking about doing that sort of stuff. I guess the question goes to Ben in terms of, Ben, what can you do, or what do you think we can do as, I guess, people financing this sort of stuff to help encourage it? I mean, where do you, if you're a developer listening to this and you want to build, you're building at the moment, but you want to build more sustainable developments, where do you start?
Yep. I think you know, for us, there's a real focus on from lenders at the moment to you know, create green products in you know, for construction finance. But typically, as Guy mentioned earlier on, they're really only focused on EPC ratings, and EPC ratings, although they're a good indication of energy efficiency, don't really tell the whole picture. And you know, it's quite easy in a sense to achieve a high EPC rating without taking any consideration, you know, to carbon emissions, which for me is you know, it's like, you know, is hiding the bigger, or is ignoring the bigger challenge and the bigger picture. So you know, I would be keen for lenders to actually really dig into that side of things and to incentivize developers to you know, achieve lower upfront carbon emissions without the need for offsetting. Because you know, I'm also not a big fan of offsetting schemes, because you know, they actually, although you can plant a number of trees or pay to plant a number of trees, wherever it is, you know, whether it's in the UK or somewhere abroad, you know, it takes years and years and years for those trees to grow and actually sequester the carbon that's been created through the process. And you know, we have a much shorter time to address, you know, global carbon emissions and climate change rates, you know, than the period of time that would take. So I think just coming back to the question is, you know, I think there should be more focus from lenders, because you know, building regs are changing anyway. You know, there's going to be significant changes coming in over the next, you know, 4 to 6 weeks even. Sorry, we're only in May, in the next 8 to 10 weeks. And you know, that's going to put a big pressure on the industry. So I think there is going to be cost increase for the majority of developers who have not already started to adapt. So if they're able to recover some of that cost through, you know, lower lending rates or lower interest rates for doing it the right way, then I think that's definitely something that should be rewarded, because it's positive all around.
And Ben, just on the cost side, I mean, I think if we look at what your costs are going to be throughout this project, it's probably like, it's pretty competitive still against how people were traditionally building. You've obviously been working on the procurement of this for a long time, so it's probably been, you know, a work of many years to do that. But what's your view? Like, it's not necessarily, if you're going to build these types of homes, that your costs are going to be a huge amount higher, is it?
No, I think the zero waste element, or the, you know, has been the most critical in I guess reducing that. So you know, I take an example that, you know, we built a timber frame. You know, from the point where we took the loan with you guys with West One to the point where we actually procured the timber, there was close to an 87% increase in the cost of structural timber. But we only had I think our increase is circa like 11 or 12% on the project, and the reason that we'd be able to offset that or minimize that increase is because of the savings we've had through, you know, not requiring any offcuts, not pricing for wastage, you know, reusing a huge amount of raw material from the existing buildings. So for me, that's the biggest you know, selling point or positive that's come out of this, that you know, we would have been underwater on this project if it had not been for those elements of the scheme, and ultimately that, you know, zero waste you know, component has really been a lifesaver for us.
Yeah, I think that's a huge sort of point to highlight and should give, I guess, other developers looking at this sort of stuff a bit of confidence in terms of actually if you do it properly and you work hard on procuring and using zero waste, then you don't have to necessarily think there's going to be an increase in bill costs.
Yeah. There's a blanket misconception, I think, that these sorts of developments just cost more overall, and that there's an ethical uplift attached to it, but it doesn't necessarily need to be that way. Alan, I just want to come over. Oh, sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to say that probably just comes down to just a lack of information being available, i.e. from finding these materials or the new products which are coming to market, which Ben mentioned. And as with anything, the more information there is, the more likely people are to start adopting those things, and rather than not thinking about doing this type of development, it would be a case of, oh, actually, no, I do know where I'm going to find those materials. I do know that the labour that would be able to install that. So therefore, let's find a funder who is willing and able to consider funding it, and then get cracking.
I think it's the more you know as a lender as well, the better a partner you can be, because this is not transactional, this is a partnership. It's going to be throughout the course of several years, and I think you can then pass that information through introducers perhaps, or your developer clients, so that the information is flowing both ways. I had a question for you around, Alan, around how much of a role you think that lenders have to play with their brokers in making sure that this is a part of the conversation. So during the sales pitch, for example, or when you're running through several of your other products that you've got, do you think this should form a sort of a staple part of it in order to encourage this sort of business?
Absolutely, because ultimately, well, West One, we're an intermediary-led business, so we do a lot of business with brokers and other intermediaries in the market. So on that basis, I think we would be playing a very big part in ensuring that we provide the information to say, actually, no, we do love to look at these products, and we will consider them for the right client. And then they can therefore confidently go back to their potential clients and say, look, I've got this option available to you to help you realize this dream. And that's the thing, it's not really even much of a dream anymore, because we've got Ben here who's shown that these things can be achieved and can be achieved quite sustainably and at a good price. There's no huge differential in the procurement cost. It's just having access to the information. So we'll continue to do that, continue to provide the information to our brokers to show them what is possible. Absolutely.
Thanks, Alan. Ben, we've had a question come through around asking whether there are any challenges in insuring properties of this sort, given the non-standard nature of the materials built.
Yeah. So no, yes and no, actually. So I think we were very careful from the start to consider, I guess, the three core things that the insurers would look for, and also mortgagees. One being a building warranty, two being full building regs compliance, and three being full fire regs compliance. And so I think working with insurers and getting them to understand that, although it's a timber frame building with majority of natural based materials, which I think the biggest challenge was the fire. We managed to overcome that by a number of different means that we sense tested with insurers as we went. And so I think now, again, like I mentioned, that blueprint has been created, and all three of those boxes have been ticked. We've got full buy-in from our insurers anyway, and a number of other insurers that we tested in the market for buildings insurance in the long term. So that's how we address that step by step.
Thank you, that makes sense. So it's just getting yourselves comfortable with it, and then you can then roll that out once it's all, like you said, the boxes are checked.
Yeah.
I just have another note that I made. Guy, you made reference to funding, the way lenders are funded, and that being perhaps creating an impetus for them to be supporting projects like this, because my understanding is that quite a bit of the sort of private equity houses and different types of funders have got requirements to do this and to show a certain level of support for ESG developments if they're in that sector. Would you agree with this? Do you think this is driving change?
Yeah, certainly. I think, if you're funded through institutional players like the banks or big investment firms, they're all looking at this because they want it to form part of their business, and they want to start talking about it. So even a year or two ago, they started talking and asking us about it and what we were doing about it. So yeah, I think everyone's thinking about it. They want to be involved in it because from a business standpoint, it's good to align yourself with sustainability and the importance of building sustainable homes. So yeah, everyone's thinking about it. So if you're going and raising institutional capital, then you want to have a part of your business that is helping drive sustainability and building new homes.
That's a wonderful incentive, because we know that is something that most specialist lenders are doing at the moment, is going out and seeking additional backing. So if they can use that to leverage their chances, then that would be great. Ben, just we've only got a few minutes left, but I just want to hear about what's next for you. You mentioned that you're working on developing the blueprints in order to scale up and to do schemes that are slightly more units. Is there anything else that you've got on your agenda that we should know about and look out for?
Yeah, I think so. One of the other things that we're looking to establish are waste processing facilities on our sites from day one that could be used to produce materials based on the techniques we've created from Orphan Road to feed into future projects, and then to stay there for the duration of the the site once it's built, to deal with the waste streams that are created from people living in the houses. That's the thing that I'm most excited about, because I think that's going to create some really interesting opportunities and materials that that can be used for furniture and fixtures and construction materials and all sorts of things. So yeah, that's the thing that I guess most ambitious for us in the short to mid-term.
And also, I had read something that you'd mentioned in an interview around there being quite a chasm between old school and new school approaches to development. Obviously, you fall into the new school category. Do you think that gap is closing, and do you feel like you're in a slightly bigger pool of innovators, or where do we sort of sit in terms of progress? If you zoom out, what does it look like to you?
Sure. I'm quite skeptical of this, because I think there's a lot of companies that say they're doing something, or maybe have intentions, but when you break down the product and what they're actually delivering, there's a lot of greenwashing going on. And I think it's partly companies themselves wanting to sell something maybe that's more ambitious or more eco than it actually is. And I think it's also an issue from there's no continuity at all in terms of definitions and benchmarks. As far as I'm concerned, you could speak to two different organizations and they could define net zero in a very different way. So I think I think that's something which needs to change very quickly in order for the industry to genuinely progress.
I think that creating perhaps a glossary that everyone can adhere to is a brilliant idea, something that I think perhaps we could write about in one of our publications to see whether there's a consensus that can be reached between perhaps several initiatives or informal bodies to get us to something close to a benchmark. Really interesting stuff. Alan, is there anything else that you would like to add? Any final thoughts for our people, viewers, watchers that have tuned in?
No, nothing really that we haven't already covered. It's just, again, like a broken record, just making sure that the information is available to developers and to brokers, to show them that they can look confidently at building more sustainably and with a lot more consideration for the environment.
Yeah, I mean, just us talking about this on screen now is working some ways towards that. We will be obviously making this available for people to read, you know, in perpetuity on our website. But I think we need to all be talking about these and perhaps not shying away from the things we don't know about it. I think that we're all sort of, I think there may be a misconception that we're all expected to enter this space knowing a certain amount, and it is complex, it is different, it is new, so perhaps we can all stand to just listen and learn a little bit. So hopefully you've helped by participating here. Guy, any final comments from you?
Just really well done to Ben, and you know, thanks for allowing us to, I guess, participate and watch on in terms of what you've done. You've sort of shown the way forward for a lot of people. So look, hats off to you and your team. There's been a lot of hard work over a lot of years. But you know, as I think Caron, you're saying, we should, hopefully this will get out to a lot of people and show them what can be done, and it's pretty cool to be a part of it really, and see it move along. So just, yeah, well done to you and your team, Ben.
Thank you. I think vice versa. I think you know, it took a lot of vision to picture what we were going to do, and I think it was only when Guy and his colleague came down a few weeks ago it all kind of you know, came together. But so yeah, I think the same. You know, if more lenders can have that vision, then you know, we'll be able to push forward a lot more as an industry a lot quicker.
To have been a fly on the wall during that pitch would be very interesting. I'd also like to concur. Thanks again to Guy and to Alan for supporting this, and very much to Ben as well for making the time. You're a very busy guy, as I discovered this week. So I really applaud what you guys are doing, and we'll be watching keenly for any updates and developments that happen in the coming months. So I think we'll finish off there. Thanks very much to everyone who tuned in. As mentioned, we will have the video available on developmentfinanceToday.co.uk next week, and we'll have a little short article, a couple of notable points and quotes included in that. But yeah, it just leaves me to say thanks once again to Alan, Guy and Ben, and wish you guys, as well as all of our viewers, a very happy rest of your day.
Cool, thank you. Thanks all.
Thank you. Bye.